to wilderness quality. Because if a region has higher wilderness quality, that means it have lower human impact and it's much easier for the wildlife to move across these regions. So actually there is a relationship between the resistance and the wilderness quality. And we created different scenarios, 4 scenarios of resistant surface. And because we have 3 core types and 4 resistant surfaces, we could have 12 scenarios, the scenario planning for the wildland network. So you can see in the right figure, you could see the ecological corridors we identified between these patches. And within the ecological corridors we model, we also identify the pinch points. In Chinese, we call it 家点 or 平静点. So that means the important regions we need to conduct ecological restoration projects. So in these regions, if we, for example, build a bridge across the roads, it will have a high probability that the animals could move or use this ecological infrastructure. So pinch points are the area with high cumulative current values, 电流. We use circuit theory here. And most important to connectivity, conservation, and restoration. So that's the 3 case studies I will introduce about mapping wilderness areas at global, national, and regional scale. And I will also talk about some related concepts which are very interesting. So how do human activities affect the rivers, the ocean, the sky, and the soundscape, besides affecting the terrestrial land surfaces? So that means the 4 concepts are very important. The first one is free flowing rivers. So the rivers that are not destroyed, the connectivity is not destroyed by human beings or the dams. And a global map shows that only about 37% of the rivers at the global scale could be seen as free flowing rivers. And they mainly distributed in Antarctica, 北极, Amazon, 亚马逊, Congo basins, 刚果盆地. So you could see, especially the China part. Actually, China has very low percent of free-flowing rivers because we built a lot of dams on these rivers. And my colleague, Professor Liu Hailong in Department of Landscape Architecture, Tsinghua University, also mapped the free-flowing rivers in China at the global scale. And they find that only 6.85% of the rivers could be seen as the potential free-flowing rivers. So in China, the percentage of free-flowing rivers is lower than the global average situation. And the second related concept is marine wilderness, because the maps we created is all about terrestrial wilderness, but actually ocean is also impacted by different types of human activities. So the concept of marine wilderness or ocean wilderness is also important for ocean biodiversity conservation. And a research found that only about 17% of the world's ocean could be seen as marine wilderness. So that means in the ocean areas, human activities is also very high. It's beyond our imagination. And among these marine wilderness, only less than 5% is located in protected areas. So there's an obvious conservation gap about ocean or marine wilderness. And the second related concept is called night skies. So I think everyone has maybe some opportunities to see the stars or the night skies, sometimes even in the urban areas, but it's not good. You can only see very good night skies in the rural areas or the wild areas. So night sky is the sky free from light pollution at night. This is a photo taken by Wang Luyuan, and she's sitting in the classroom. And a global analysis finds that about 83% of the world's population, human population, live under light polluted skies. So that means in our daily life, about more than 80% of the residents, they cannot see a real night sky. So I think that's maybe harmful for the human society. And Professor Zhong Le from Huazhong Agricultural University has conducted analysis on the relationship between China's protected areas and night skies. So from his findings, we can say that if you want to see a real night sky, you need to go into the protected areas or go out of the urban or rural areas. So in the the national parks pilot areas and other types of protected areas, the quality of night skies is higher than other regions. And the fourth related concept is natural quiet. We call it 自然寂静 or 自然宁静. And my friend Professor Xu Xiaoqing in Tongji University has conducted some mapping research at the protected area level to identify the natural quiet within protected areas and to discuss how should we manage or conserve these natural quiet as valuable resources. So actually noise pollution is harmful not only to wildlife but also to human beings. So protecting natural quiet is also an important issue in many national parks and protected areas around the world. So that's four related concepts relevant to wilderness areas. And that's the second part. We discussed the mapping wilderness areas to uncover the spatial distribution of these regions at global, national, and regional scales. And we discussed the free-flowing rivers, the ocean, marine wilderness, and also the night skies, and also the natural quiet. So after we know their location, we need to discuss how could we conserve or protect them. So in the second part, I will talk about conserving wilderness areas. And I will use 3 case studies. The first one is the United States, and the second is Europe. And we'll discuss a little bit about how to conserve wilderness areas in China. So actually there is an international wilderness conservation movement. So it's beyond one single country, because as you could see from the global wilderness map, it exists in every continent and biomes, ecoregions. And from a guideline published by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, there are 48 countries have wilderness areas established, well, legislative designation as the IUCN 1B category sites, and they are not overlapped with the other categories. And besides these 48 countries, there are 23 other countries that have wilderness areas established via administrative designation or wilderness zones within protected areas. So in these countries, although they don't have sites identified as category 1B, wilderness protected areas, but they have a zone within the protected areas or national parks to protect the wilderness quality. And that's the global big picture. And I will talk about the United States first, because in the modern perspective, wilderness conservation originated in this country and these ideas spread to the other countries. So some years before, I have visited the National Wilderness Preservation System and talked with the land management agencies at the central government level, including the National Park Service and also National Forest Agency. So actually, even in the United States, they experience very severe destroy of wilderness before they start to notice the value of wilderness or start to protect wilderness. So in the Americans' history, there's a very big movement called westward expansion, 西进运动. So when they found the new continent, they start from the east coast to develop to the west coast. So in this process, they destroyed a lot of wilderness and wildlife, and also Indian cultural. So the local cultural and biological diversity are destroyed to a very severe degree because of these new settlers. But in this process, some figures, very important figures, started to notice the value and the importance of wilderness conservation, including George Catlin, Emerson, Thoreau, John Muir, Aldo Leopold, and Bob Marshall. So after they, because of their efforts, the United States published a Wilderness Act in 1964. So this is first national law of wilderness preservation around the world, and this law established a system called National Wilderness Preservation System in the United States. And actually, I think many scholars in China are very familiar with the national park system in the United States. Well, we know less about the National Wilderness Preservation System. But actually, these two systems has a very strong connection or overlap. So the National Wilderness Preservation System and the National Park System, they have a very high level of overlap. So if we look at the NWPS, the National Wilderness Preservation System, we can see it is managed by 4 agencies, including the National Park Service, the Forest Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Bureau of Land Management. And in these 4 agencies, the National Park Service manage about 40% of the lands in NWPS. So that means in the NWPS, there are 40% of the land are managed by the National Park Service. And if we look at the National Park Service, if we look at the, there are 423 individual units in the National Park Service in the United States. And in the lands that National Park Service manage, there are about 52%. They also belong to the NWPS. So that means about over a half of the lands in the National Park Service managed, they are also designated as a wilderness conservation sites. So they also belong to NWPS. So these two numbers shows that there is a very high level of overlap between the National Wilderness Preservation System and the National Park system. So that means wilderness plays a very important role in national parks and protected areas. And if we look at the continental scale, if we look beyond a country, the United States, we could see there's a project called North America Wildland Network. So it's a very large continental scale conservation project that's including the United States, Canada, and also Mexico. And they emphasize 3 elements. The core wild areas, which has the highest level of ecological integrity, and also connectivity that I have also discussed here, the connectivity, and also carnivores, 食肉动物, the top predators in the ecosystem food webs. And they promote 4 continental wildways, so you could understand it as ecological corridors or ecological networks. So including the Eastern, Western Pacific Wildway and also the Mexico program. So that's a very large scale protection. You could imagine, can we propose a project from Heilongjiang to Hainan? So that's the very big scale conservation. Okay, that's the situation in the United States. Let's talk about the situation in Europe. Actually, Europe is a continent that has a very high level of human impact because it has a much longer history and has a lot of cultural heritages and cultural landscapes. Almost nowhere that human beings do not exist. So is the concept of wilderness useful to Europe? Because the context is very different from the United States. But actually, in recent years, the European countries start to notice the value of their remaining wilderness areas, although very less exist. So in 2009, the European Wilderness Resolution is passed. So that means at the European level, they recognize the value of wilderness areas. And they also created a guideline on wilderness conservation in the Natural 2000. Natural 2000 is the protected area system in Europe, and they want to promote conservation of wilderness in their protected area system. And also there are many NGOs, for example, promoting a European wilderness network. And they propose different categories, because the diversity of wild ecosystems. So they propose the wild islands, the wild forest, the wild coast, and the wild river. So this is related to the concept such as the free-flowing rivers and also marine wilderness. And they proposed 10 principles that wilderness areas should satisfy. So when they identify the wilderness areas, it should consider a lot of indicators that these regions should satisfy. And after the assessment, they classify their wilderness into different types. They call it bronze, silver, gold, and platinum wilderness. So if you have a high wilderness quality, you may be listed as a gold or platinum wilderness. So that means they use different classification systems to recognize the different levels of wilderness quality. Actually, this is very suitable for Europe because, as I mentioned, very few real and intact large wilderness exist in Europe. So they could use this kind of classification system to recognize some very small patches of wilderness areas. So if you look at the human footprint index of Europe, so this map shows the human impact level. So the red part is areas with very high level of human intervention, disturbance, or human footprint. So you could see the wild areas only exist in North Europe and Iceland. So is wilderness, the concept, useful for the continental Europe? So that's a question they are thinking and discussing. So that's why they also propose a European rewilding network. Because they have less wild, so they want to create more, and they want to restore the native ecosystems that have been destroyed by human activities. So they want to make Europe a wider place and with more space for wild nature. And that's at the European level, and I will give two cases at the country level. So the first one is Scotland. Scotland is at the north of United Kingdom, and the Highlands, the landscape is extremely beautiful. And this is a photo I took in the Creven wildwood in Scotland. And in Scotland, they protect about 20% of their terrestrial areas as wildland. And this includes 42 wildland. And for each wildland, they have a very specific and clear spatial boundary and the descriptive documents to document the basic information and the value of these regions. So you may notice that they do a lot of conservation work because they designate about 20% of their total terrestrial area as the wildland. And they use the term wildland rather than wilderness. So that's also to suit the context in their own country. And another case is in Germany. Germany is also a highly densely populated country. So very few or nearly no wilderness exist in this country. But in their biological diversity conservation plan, they propose that this country should achieve a 2% of the national land be designated as large-scale wilderness areas. So this is an ambitious target for their country, but they think it's achievable, and they are making efforts to achieve this goal. Because in a country, if there is no wild, the public will be eager to create more wild nature in their daily life, because it could provide many benefits. For example, especially the health benefits to the human beings in the modernized world. And we will briefly discuss how to protect China's wilderness, because we could see the experience in the United States and Europe. Actually, China, I think, is like a combination of United States and Europe, because in Western China, in Western China, there are some places, the wilderness areas is even higher, or is higher than all of the wild areas in the United States, because we still have, for example, Qiangtang, there's very large and intact wilderness areas. And if you look at the global wilderness map, you could see Qiangtang as the global scale, but you couldn't see any patches in the United States. So in Western China, we have some regions that have higher wilderness quality than all of the landscapes in the United States. But in Eastern China, it's more like Europe, because we have even more higher population density and human impacts than Europe. So it's a kind of combination of United States and Europe. And if we overlay the wilderness patches map with the nature reserve in China, we could find that about 80% of the existing wilderness areas in China are not covered by nature reserves. So that means obvious conservation gaps of wilderness areas. Although not all of the wilderness areas should be included in the protected areas, but it still shows a great potential that our protected areas could expand and to protect more wildlands. So how to protect China's wilderness? I listed several problems in China's wilderness conservation. The first one is insufficient awareness of wilderness values. So we need to recognize and revalue the regions that have lower human impact in our different levels of policies at the national, provincial levels. And insufficient wilderness investigation. Although we have a very initial wilderness map, but we do not have the basic informations and the values they have. So still a lot of investigation, the research need to be conducted. And the third point, and the most important point, is that there are still obvious wilderness conservation gaps. So, but that also shows that we still have a large potential or opportunities to expand our protected area system to cover more wilderness areas. And the fourth point is that the severe fragmentation of wilderness areas, especially in eastern China. So as I illustrated in the Taihang Mountains, you could see, and also you could go into these places, you could find that a lot of roads, a lot of human settlements that are separating the integrity of wilderness areas. And the last one is that the management quality or government's quality could be improved. So mainstreaming and inventory and comprehensive hierarchical conservation, connectivity conservation, and management quality improvement are the strategies that we could use to protect China's wilderness areas. And we have overlaid the special boundary of, we have 5 national parks in China now. The first bunch, including the Three River Source, the Northeast China and Leopard National Park, the Hainan Tropical Rainforest National Park, the Giant Panda National Park, and Mount Wuyi National Park, with the wilderness quality map, or you could also overlay it with the wilderness patches map. You could find that, for example, in Hainan, the blue shows the higher wilderness quality. So that means the national park we designated, has already protect the regions that have higher wilderness quality. So that means the boundary is relatively reasonable in this case. But you could also see some blue parts which have high wilderness quality that is located outside the national parks. So basically, I think we could conduct work in two aspects. The first is to promote wilderness conservation in the protected area system and in the existing national parks, nature reserves, and nature parks to identify the wilderness areas in these regions and to promote the management quality. And the other point is also very important is that outside the protected areas, we need to conserve more and restoring more wilderness areas. Okay, so that's today's lecture. If we do a summary, we have discussed the definition and value of national park of wilderness areas, and we use three scales research to illustrate how to map wilderness areas. And we discuss wilderness conservation in the United States, in Europe, and in China. And before closing this lecture, I would recommend the books again. So I hope you could take a photo or take a note. These 10 books are really very interesting and very inspiring books if you are interested in nature conservation. And also, because the limited time, I could not go into details of each case, and you could read some papers that will have more information produced by our team. Okay, that's today's lecture. Thank you very much. Thank you. Today's lecture. Thank you very much. Thank you.